Welcome back to the Valley Campaign, guys, and what a devastating turn 9 was for both sides. Before we get into it, if you haven't already, do please like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on anything in the future. Also go and check us out on Facebook so that you can upload any projects that you're working on. For those of you that aren't aware, the rule set that we're using is called Follow the Flags. I've created it and it is available on my Ko-fi page, so feel free to go over there. Links in the description. So, how did the turn start off? As you can see, the Union was strong up in the northeast. They had Strasbourg with one army, and just south of Strasbourg, I think it's Woodstock, they had another army. And up in the west, they had their force who were continuing to withdraw. The orders were given for both of those central armies to march east. So the lower army under General Shields, this is for the Union, was ordered up to Wardensville to try and catch Jackson, who was there. And the force from Strasbourg, which was General Banks, was ordered to march the shortest route again to try and catch Jackson. They were getting reinforcements coming from Newton shortly, so they still had some troops who were going to be giving them aid. As for the Confederates, their instructions for Jackson were to march on Strasbourg and try and destroy Banks. And there was a force of cavalry for the Confederates who were in Front Royal, who were to come across and take Strasbourg, and General Ewell was to follow up and join Jackson at an opportune time. So the first of our two battles this turn is the Battle of Casus, in this case the first Battle of Casus. This has General Jackson's force coming across, and he is going to be engaged by the forces under General Banks and a few extra units coming across from the town of Newton. Overall, Jackson has many more units, although his units are pretty weak, whilst the Union player on the other side has fewer units but stronger health, stronger cohesion with each of his. Due to the weather conditions being very heavy rain and rain for the previous two turns, we did have staggered arrivals for both players, just randomly rolled for them. So not everything arrived at the same time, so that was useful for the Union specifically. So for our Battle of Casus, or Casus, we've got one Union force arriving down this road, the second under McDowell arriving down this road, and the Confederates arriving centrally. The battlefield is relatively flat, a few little wood blocks and a little bit of farm infrastructure, but overall not too much. At the end of turn 1, the Union troops have advanced, the artillery stayed static and fired a shot down. Despite the rain, it was able to get a shot off, which was good, which landed in amongst the infantry and artillery on the road, inflicting a few casualties. For the Confederates, they pushed up their cavalry to the farmstead, and everyone else just kept trudging along the road. So turn 2 started with the Union gaining the initiative, and they carried on up the road. The artillery tried to fire, but due to the heavy rain, was unable to. The Confederate cavalry has left the village and they are moving north, whilst the infantry and artillery are still heading into the farmstead/village to get into better positions. So turn 3 went to the Union again. Their infantry carried on advancing, and they got their reinforcements of one infantry and a cavalry coming in. They did attempt to fire again with the artillery, but that heavy rain again prevented them from firing. The Confederates, the 1st Division, has now basically occupied the town, whilst their 2nd has just started to come onto the field. So with turn 4, saw the Confederates gain the initiative, and they really finished building their defensive works and moving their troops into the town. Their 2nd Division is moving up. Then we had the Union troops advancing to the north and to the south. This turn the rain prevented the Confederates from being able to fire their artillery, luckily for the Union. Whilst the Union did get a shot off into the centre of the town, inflicting a couple of light wounds on the infantry and one onto an artillery piece. So, an interesting turn. Okay, so as we had turn 5, the Union troops advanced and started getting into a line so they could start pouring on the fire. The Confederate cavalry and infantry came out of the town to try and meet the Union cavalry as it came on. This turn, the Union were unable to fire due to the weather. However, the 3 Confederate guns fired onto this regiment and they did break. On the other side of the field, the cavalry clashed and the Confederate cavalry were broken in the combat. So at the end of turn 7, the Union troops were advancing, and after getting 2 blasts of grape shot and a volley of musket fire, the Union just disintegrated their regiment and fell apart. This regiment, which broke last turn, got hit by artillery and is pretty well non-existent, but they're just running for it. The cavalry over on this side, they beat the cav last turn, the Confederate cavalry. Then they moved on to the Confederate infantry, whereby during the melee both units basically got destroyed to the point where they were no longer capable of fighting, so they're gone. The Union commander did survive, so he's riding back. General McDowell did take a wound from the grape shot, but he's still alive. But overall, the Union are withdrawing from the battle, and so it is a Confederate victory, although heavy losses suffered by the Confederates. So our second battle, we're returning to Wardensville. We fought there last turn as well. This time we've got General Ewell with 3 infantry brigades, 1 artillery battery, so not a huge force, but his is veteran and very well supplied. Their cohesion level is strong. So it's a good, tough, but small force. Up against him is the much larger Union army under shields. Again, due to the small roads, the mountain passes, and the bad rain, they will be coming on in 3 distinct divisions, as you can see here, starting first on the left, then the middle, and then the right. So again, the Confederates will be outnumbered, but the Union troops are depleted in cohesion as well. So we're fighting on the same battlefield as a couple of turns ago. We've got the Union troops who will be coming on from this corner as they march through the valley. And the Confederates would have been coming on from this side, but looking on the strategic map, the distance they had to cover was less, so they will be starting in a defensive position within the town. So turn 1 saw the Union 1st Division arrive on the field. The artillery unlimbered and fired a shot into the Confederate troops behind the hedge, scored a hit and did a little bit of damage. In return, the Confederate artillery fired onto the column as it was marching and did a little bit of damage again onto the Union. So at the end of turn 2, the Union had carried on their advance. They fired again onto the Confederates behind the hedge. Union artillery fired back, and the first of the Union units did break. We had to check the other units in case the panic spread, but luckily the rest of the column stayed strong. But that's the first Union unit broken. At the end of turn 3, the Union unit kept running. We were unable to rally them. The infantry carried on their advance up the road. And in the Confederate positions, the unit who'd been hit a few times is repositioning behind the town just to get out of artillery fire. As for shooting this turn, the heavy rain continued, and this time the guns didn't fire on either side. At the end of turn 4, the Union troops had continued their advance up the road. However, after taking another hit from the Confederate artillery, the 2nd unit has now routed. The remainder passed their test and are still formed, but that's the 2nd unit of Union troops who are routed. This turn the Union did get their 2nd division come on, so they are moving on, and next turn they'll get their final units. For the Confederates this turn, they've just repositioned that unit finally behind the town, so now it's quite safe from enemy artillery fire. Turn 6, the end of. The 2nd Division marched up, their gun unlimbered. The 3rd Division, which is more like a brigade, an assortment, has started to try and do a flanking manoeuvre. And the original are still pushing forwards up the road. They got hit by the artillery though, so took quite a lot more casualties. Okay, at turn 7 saw the infantry cutting across to get behind the hedgerows. They're out of line of sight of the gun. The 2nd Division has moved up, and the 3rd are flanking round. Confederates stayed static, just putting artillery shots down. So turn 8 saw the flanking manoeuvre continue with the cavalry racing forwards. The 2nd Division moving up the road. Although due to Confederate artillery fire, the 1st Regiment did break, unfortunately. The 2nd stayed strong, and the residue of the 1st Division have continued their advance, and they are in pretty good condition. So at the end of turn 9, this 2nd Union Division was continuing its advance. The 1st carried on its flanking manoeuvre. The Confederates repositioned their artillery this turn. On this side, the Union cavalry and artillery are advancing still to get into a better flanking position. Infantry is still advancing, and artillery stayed position. So turn 10 started off well for the Union. They were pushing up on this side. Cavalry are getting into position for their push. Confederates are kind of splitting their fire in the centre, not knowing where to go. The 1st Division got into position to do their assault next turn, and as our 2nd were moving up the road, Confederate artillery fired, killed the commander of the division, and smashed the 1st Regiment, or Brigade, who routed. After they routed, the 2nd unit routed, and after the 3rd, the final one routed. So the whole division fell apart. So in the centre, the Union forces are gone for all intents and purposes. We'll see what happens next turn, but it's not looking good whatsoever. So we made a quick mistake. The 1st Division up there, one of the units did have to take a morale check, which he failed. And as he ran, panic spread through the 2nd unit, and they broke also. So for the Union, there is routing along the entirety of their line. So the Union have now failed. The army's collapsed, and it is a Confederate victory. So at the end of the turn, the Confederate cavalry had come across from Front Royal and had taken Strasbourg. General Banks was defeated pretty soundly, and as he was unable to retreat, his forces have surrendered. General Shields' forces were able to withdraw straight back the way they came, so they were okay, and they escaped without pursuit, which was lucky for them. So overall, pretty devastating for the Union forces. So where does that leave us now going forwards? So for General Jackson, as you can see, his force is a skeleton crew. It is severely decimated, but it is still intact. What do we do with him next? Possibly, I would say, move into Strasbourg, and that way they can try and recoup. General Garnett, alongside Jackson, they were in the same army group. Again, his force highly decimated, although they had victory, but maybe an Pyrrhic victory. General Ewell, his troops did take quite high casualties overall, but they're still reasonably strong as a division, so they're still battlefield combat effective. And General Johnson over in the west, his force is still pretty unscathed, so he's a combat effective unit. So for the Confederates, they're in a bit of a mixed situation. Overall, they are very tired, let's put it that way. For the Union, Shields' force, although starting off with lots and lots, what we've done is we've amalgamated them, and so from 8 we're down to 3 infantry, and as you can see they're all pretty small. The artillery and the cavalry, it's very small, very depleted. General Schenk, he's over in the west. His force, again, decimated. If he can make it back to Cumberland, he'll be lucky. We've got General McDowell's force, which has been destroyed / captured, so they're out of it. So not too good for them. And then we've got the remainder of the forces. So in Newton now we've got a reasonable force, but nothing too huge. And a few bits and pieces up north. We've got an artillery piece on itself. And then we've got about 2 infantry and that artillery in the north. But again, they're a bit too far away up in, I think it's Hayfield. So the big question, what do we do now? I haven't actually come up with any options for this situation. I figured I would leave it to you guys. Overall, I would say we do have a Confederate victory. They've achieved all their objectives of keeping the Union in the peninsula, in the valley, sorry, and preventing them from going over to the peninsula. They've beaten many more Union armies and killed more generals. So I would say it is a Confederate victory. Although you could argue that they have suffered so heavily that they're going to be no use over in the Peninsular campaign. So there's an argument either way. So my thoughts are that we would call it a Confederate victory, because I don't really see there's much chance of the Union being able to, in the next 3 turns, be able to get everyone together and win. But that's what I'm going to leave up to you. We're going to go live again this Friday, regular time. And then we can just have a chat. I'll get the map laid out, and if you guys want to, then we can come up with the battle plan on the fly, so to speak. You can just tell me, whoever joins the live can tell me what they want me to do, and I'll do it, rather than me coming up with the options ahead of time. So it'll be entirely up to you. Equally, if once we get to that stage everyone thinks game over, cool, we can just have a group debrief, talk about what we thought went well and what we could improve on. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this one. Quite a long one this week, but this is quite a lot that happened, so it was an interesting one. I've really enjoyed it. It was a very tough turn, and the heavy rain really screwed up the Union plans there, big time. The amount of times that their artillery weren't able to fire when they needed them to was devastating. So, very interesting rule, and the fact that the heavy rain delayed their arrivals made it very interesting, very fun, although very frustrating for the Union player. But I hope that you've been enjoying it as much as I have, and I look forward to seeing you on Friday. So till then, guys, take care.